The Strangers Chapter 2 is out now, and I got a chance to see it day one, and my anticipation for this film was very low. The bar, unfortunately, was hung very low for this one because I was not a fan of Chapter 1. Actually, Chapter 1 made my worst list for the year that it came out. I felt that it was an unnecessary and pointless retelling of The Strangers. It was a direct remake of the 2006, 2007 film, and it didn't offer any new story or context that we didn't already know. It was the exact same movie that we saw 10, 15 years ago. And so with Chapter 2, I was optimistic going into this movie. Yeah, I was praying for the best, but I was also like, this probably isn't going to be the greatest movie. But, Chapter 1, maybe that film had to be bad. Maybe that had to be, the first film, to be released to really kickstart the story that Renny Harlin wants to do here with these 3 films. Who knows? So, I was curious to see what the middle chapter in his little saga was going to be. So I was willing to give this franchise another chance. But before we get into my positives and negatives, I'm going to give you a quick plot synopsis on Chapter 2. So Chapter 2 takes place directly after the events of Chapter 1, where we have our main character in the hospital here after the attack at the Airbnb with the strangers. And it just so happens, she is not alone. The strangers are there with her in this hospital. And so for the next 90 minutes, it is an intense and thrilling chase sequence. And while that doesn't sound very interesting as a story, I have to be honest, that is all I wanted from this movie. So now, jumping right into it with the positives for The Strangers Chapter 2, and to continue on my point with the story, my first positive is actually going to be the story to this film. Sometimes you like to watch films that you can just sit back, put your legs up, grab a beer, grab your friends, grab some snacks, and just have a great time. With this film delivers on being entertaining. There are a few dull moments in the middle, but for the most part, this film had me glued to the screen. I was entertained all throughout this movie, and I can't fault a movie, for being entertaining. This is a film that knows exactly what it is. This is a film that's its sole purpose is to entertain its audience. And I think the film does that really well. And it's a story that doesn't take itself really seriously. It's a very bare bones story. There's not a whole lot of new added story to this one. There are some new story beats in here, and there is some new lore, which I will get into in just a second. But yeah, this was a film that, it kept me entertained with some of the visual cues that it did. Renny Harlin, you see a bit of his Nightmare on Elm Street flavor, especially during the beginning sequence that takes place in the hospital. There's one scene where there's a change of light that reminded me a lot of A Nightmare on Elm Street, which was a really great throwback there. And it manages to keep the intensity and the suspense unique. Every single scene, it's something different. It's something that you haven't seen before. And, and that I liked because it made each scene unpredictable for me. And, especially if your whole film is relying on intensity and suspense, that can come across as being really boring. In here, I thought there was enough creativity to the point where it never felt boring to me, at least. And now moving on to my second positive, is the added lore in here. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you do learn more about this town's past. You learn more about a certain name that's been name dropped, in chapter one and in the other two films, Pray at Night and the original, that they do dive into a bit more here. They do dive into the killings of this town and exactly how long that has happened, which I thought that part of the film was really interesting to me. And so they just touch the base for what chapter 3 is going to introduce and hopefully expand on more. And, I can't say I'm not excited for chapter 3. This film did get me a little bit excited to see where they're going to go with this final chapter. Now, jumping into my next positive here, is the performance from our final girl, from our main actress in here. I thought she was phenomenal. I don't remember what I thought of her in chapter 1, but, really this is her film through and through. And there's a lot of emotion that she has to put into her performance here, as well as the physicality that she has to put into this role. And I think she does an exceptional job at selling the intensity and the suspense. Since this whole film is leaning on her shoulders, I think she does a really good job at carrying this film. And I think she's a well-deserved final girl. I think chapter 1 wasn't the greatest start to her, so I'm glad that she can have this film as her redemption, because I'm actually on board with her character now. I think she really proves herself with some of the decisions that she makes in here that I really liked. And now the strangers in here. I really like their design. Like, it feels very, very homemade. It feels very low budget, which I really like. Like, if this feels like the strangers could be anyone, like it could be you or I. And I think that's the fun of the strangers, is you don't know who they are. And, and I think that creates a really fun element, for this film. The masks have like a very have like a very kind of like old, kind of stylish look to it, which it worked in the first film, and once again it works in here really well. And I think the killers have a lot more to do in here. You have Dollface, you have Axeman, is Baghead. I think it's Baghead. All the strangers have that one moment in this movie. My next positive is going to be the ending. Like, I was not expecting this film to have as good of an ending as it did. Like, this ending surprised the shit out of me. Like, man, like this ending, I was not expecting for this movie to even dive in to even dive into this. But the ending of this film is really good, and it sets up a lot of questions that, once again, going back to my last point, it gets me excited for chapter 3. And I thought it was a very clever way to close out your second chapter in here. My next positive, I have a whole list of positives right here, but is the locations. We have Act 1 that takes place at the hospital. We have Act 2 and 3 that take place in the woods. And man, can I just say, Renny Harlin, this guy does a great job at world building in here. I do not want to go into specifics here, but the strangers aren't the only threat. You're in the woods and you're in an environment where you don't know where the hell you are, and it's an environment that you don't belong in, which does create for a very unique sequence that does happen in the middle portion of this film that I thought, to a lot of people, it could come across as feeling out of place. If you've already seen the film, you know the scene I'm talking about. But for me, I thought it worked really well because, there's a lot of dangers in the world, and there's a lot of things that can kill you besides people with weapons. And I'll put it that way, and I think it just creates another layer of fear to this film. Now, the strangers are not the only ones to fear, and it reminded me actually a lot of The Revenant, actually. That's all I'm going to say, but I love the way Renny Harlin directed this specific scene because he goes from first person to then the subject being revealed. And I won't say what it is since the movie only came out a couple of days ago, but I thought it was really effective. It reminded me a lot of Evil Dead and a lot of Jaws. Jaws in a lot of ways. Jaws is a great comparison, actually. That really surprised me. Like when this scene happened, I was like, at first I was a bit conflicted, but then after sitting in my seat and digesting that scene for 2 minutes, I was like, you know what? That's really clever. That's a really kind of clever way to kind of build out your world here, and it has a very realistic approach to it, and I thought it worked really, really well in here. I think the cinematography, I think the production value is a lot better in this one than Chapter 1. As far as negatives, I would say, the very limited amount of story. Like I could have, we're now 2 out of 3 films into this franchise, and I could have maybe gone for some answers, which this film certainly does give you, but like really the story that they want to set up doesn't really show itself until the last third of this film. I liked the entire middle section and the entire beginning. I thought all of that stuff was really, really great. But as far as like the story that he actually wants to tell, it's mentioned through flashbacks, and the flashbacks look really good as well. Like the time period that they're trying to create, I think they do a really great job, and I think it's the flashbacks are really interesting in this film. I thought they could have done more with that as well. I thought they could have done more with the flashbacks, like maybe just some more context to it, but I do like the story that we do get there. I would say, we don't really see a lot of like mourning. I forget who their characters actually were in part 1, but I know it was like a husband or boyfriend or something like that. As I said, forgettable. But we don't really get like a mourning scene. I like how she does kind of move past it, and like she's the bigger person. She wants to survive. This is survival of the fittest. I like that kind of kick-ass attitude from her, but I don't know, like I wanted to kind of feel more sympathy, and there's not really like a scene in this where she's mourning. Like, at the beginning there kind of is, but I was like, if you just lost a loved one, like you would be mourning for days, and just I wanted to see that. I wanted to see her really broken down to her weakest and her being reborn as this strong final girl. I think that would have been, been a great arc for her in this film. But, besides that, I had an absolute blast with this film. This film is just fun, it's intense, it's thrilling, it's entertaining. Like, you know, sometimes you just want sometimes you just want to see three psychopaths, running around chasing someone. At the end of the day, that's entertainment. Excuse me. But anyways, guys, yeah, that is my review for The Strangers Chapter 2. If you have seen it, let me know down in the comment section down below. What did you think of it? Are you excited for Chapter 3? And while you're there, let me know, what did you think of Chapter 1 down in the comment section down below, guys. So until the next video, yeah, I will talk to you guys later.